Hello. Whoa. This is my first time hearing myself in this microphone. This is not how I thought it was going to sound. It'll take a second for me to get used to the sharp sound of my own voice. I'm sorry it's so shrill. Good morning, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Melanie Nepinak Hadley. My spirit name is Mashkuiginuinikwe. I'm a member of Minnegozibe Anishinaabe in Manitoba, Canada, which was formerly known as Pine Creek First Nation. I'm Bear Clan in Ojibwe. So happy to be here. I'm not completely off book, so I'm going to read a couple of notes off of my phone. Thank you all for joining us. As you know, this conversation, Arctic Storytelling in the New World Order, brings together this esteemed panel. Despite the fact that I know these folks, I am going to just read their bios so I don't leave anything out. They also gave me very specific notes. Listen, I love them. They were a bit diva with me, so I don't want to leave any details behind when I introduce them. Okay, so first up, we have Emile Hertling Péronard. He's an award-winning, Oscar-nominated Greenlandic producer and the founder of Ánorâk Film, a Cannes Producers Network producer, on the move, and chair of the Arctic Indigenous Film Fund. His work has screened at Cannes, Sundance, Venice, and Berlinale, helping by bringing Greenlandic storytelling onto the world stage. He is also the co-festival director for Nuuk International Film Festival. Thank you, Emile, for joining us. Oh, you guys really sat out of order. That's fine, that's fine. You'd be surprised to know I'm actually quite nimble on my feet. Next, we have Lajla Utsi. She is the managing director and co-founder of the International Sámi Film Institute. A former documentary filmmaker, she has spent decades building international partnerships and advancing Sámi storytelling globally, while supporting the growth and visibility of Indigenous filmmakers across the circumpolar north. Thank you so much, Lajla. Next, we have Jason Ryle, my Winnipeg kin. Jason is the director of the Arctic Indigenous Film Fund and internationally respected curator, producer, and arts leader. Formerly the longtime director of Imaginative, he has spent years championing Indigenous cinema globally and continues to play a central role in connecting Arctic Indigenous storytellers to international audiences and markets. And he's one of TIFF's international programmers. So he's pretty busy, honestly. It's a bit much, Jason. You need to leave some for the rest of us. Next, we have Kerry Swanson. She's the CEO of the Indigenous Screen Office, where she became a leading voice in advancing Indigenous storytelling, advocacy, and screen-based infrastructures across Canada. With more than 2 decades in the Indigenous arts and culture sector, she has helped shape pathways for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis creators, both nationally and internationally. She's also my boss. I should have probably mentioned what I do. I'm the VP of Industry Growth and Partnerships at the Indigenous Screen Office, and prior to that had a background as a development and production executive for a couple of national broadcasters in Canada, and also did talent development and investments of sustainability and equity on behalf of Warner Brothers in Canada. So I'm fairly new to the ISO team, just a little over a year, although I feel like I've been there for 10,000 years now, no offense. So this conversation talks a lot about, we're hoping to sort of dive into the Arctic storytelling world. They've really always sort of been a focal point when it comes to resources, when it comes to climate, but now I think we're gonna dive a little bit further and talk a little bit about the storytelling community there. So I'm gonna actually start with you, Emile. I'm coming in with something a little bit basic, but we're gonna start off slow and steady, and then I'm going to get into some heavier topics, and then maybe I can't remember if we left time at the end for a Q&A, but percolate on some questions, no pressure. If anybody here does think of a question at the end though, you'll be my favorite and you'll have won the audience award, which is my friendship. So we're gonna start off pretty light here. I'm starting with you. When you think about Arctic storytelling, what does that actually mean to you personally? I emailed this to you, so you can't act surprised. Is there such thing as Arctic cinematic language or perspective?
Thank you, Melanie. It's really difficult to follow up on that introduction. I'm a much slower speaker. But thanks for the kind introduction, and thanks for this very big question. I think there's an Arctic cinema storytelling tradition evolving still. I mean, I'm from Greenland. It's such a small film community, so that when a filmmaker makes 2 horror films, it's considered a wave, right? At least to the outside world. So then we get all these kinds of questions. So, oh, I see a trend of horror films coming out of Greenland. Does that have something to do with your storytelling traditions and stuff? But it's literally just 2 films. So it might not be considered a wave for us. But what I do think about Arctic storytelling is that we have an oral storytelling tradition, you know, spanning thousands of years. And of course, what have happened to us in our history is that what has been written down in history wasn't by us. So we told the stories and someone else wrote them down. And later on, we told stories and other people filmed them for cinema. But our own film history just started like 25-ish years ago. The first Greenlandic short film came out in 1999. The first Greenlandic feature film came out in 2009. So now we are basically only just starting up, reclaiming our stories on screen and trying to set the record straight also with the stories that were told on our behalf in cinema throughout film history. I mean, the first film role made by a Danish cinematographer, which was in 1897. It was Greenlandic sled dogs in a park in Copenhagen. So that was just like wrongful representation of Greenlandic culture from the, you know, dawn of cinema, literally. And so we try to tell our own stories now and to kind of also be allowed to tell the stories that were told for us or on our behalf earlier on. But also now trying to move on to a place where we can be free of that, be free of of this misrepresentation, be free of the prejudices, of the cliches that were told about us, and just tell the stories that we want to tell.
I do, and we're going to dive, I think, a little bit more into that in that conversation about sovereignty. But before we do, I do want to stick till just defining what Arctic storytelling. So I'm coming to you with this one, Jason. You know, we're hearing from Emile, it's a much more personal experience, but from your position, having been a programmer, having worked on the funding side, even being a producer, what does Arctic storytelling mean to you? How would you define it?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's incredible is, you know, the first 2 things that came to mind with the question, Mel, was, I mean, Cannes has a long history with Arctic Indigenous storytelling. Like, one of the key pieces of work was Atar by Inuk director Zacharias Kunuk, which won the Camera d'Or here in 2001. And it was a surprise win, I think, across the board. And he gave his acceptance speech in Inuktitut, which was such a, you know, a beacon of pride for so many people. But also the translators weren't prepared for their win, so they actually didn't have any translation available for the Inuktitut, so they had to do that in hindsight. And that really was a bellwether for so many things. I mean, not just, you know, Arctic Indigenous storytelling, but Indigenous cinema writ large globally. I'm not from the north. I'm also Anishinaabe from southern Canada, which some people think is very far north, but actually it's, you know, the latitude is very similar to Europe, mainland Europe. And I first traveled to the circumpolar Arctic in 2006. And that's what I want to bring forward, I think, is sort of like an invitation to really consider what we're talking about from a completely different vantage point than we're used to. Like, don't think of the Mercator map, don't think of any of our usual maps, and looking at the globe from the top of the world is actually really transformative when you sort of look at kind of how connected these nations and people were. And so that's what the storytelling is. We're actually talking about this incredible, you know, community, incredibly diverse, incredibly well-connected through history, that have shared sort of, you know, shared storytelling traditions, a lot of diversity, very different kinds of landscapes, but also a shared history of colonization that we're still unbreaking and unshackling from. So, I mean, it's brave, it's new, it's, you know, from a larger industry perspective too. I mean, this is one of the most exciting kind of areas of global cinema, is we're looking at creating, you know, bringing to light stories that have not been on screen before, some of which may be thousands of years old, but also incredibly contemporary.
It's interesting you mentioned that map, right? Like the Arctic is the sort of connective tissue, and I don't think people see it that way because of how it's been represented to us. Even when you were talking about where you're from, I wanted to say, like, because I feel like we're Southern, but that has a different connotation outside of the Indigenous community, right? All of us, it feels very different. So I was like, I think I'm just going to say we're Winnipeg, Kent, which is a small city in the prairies that we're both from. But no, I hear what you're saying, and I'm going to come to you, Kerry, for this one, because in your position, or even just in your background in the arts, you are looking at this broader view of what Indigenous is. So maybe we can talk a little bit about how different the Arctic Indigenous is from that larger group, and sort of how their needs are different.
Yeah, I think the example of Atanarjuat and Zacharias Kunuk is a great jumping off point. It really highlights how long the fight has been for Arctic filmmakers to receive the funding that they need. So when that film was made, and it was released in 2000, it was a time when Telefilm, our national funder, did not support content in Indigenous languages. So he had to go find the funding outside of the national funding body. And the way he did that was he pitched it to the National Film Board of Canada as a documentary because it was based on a traditional story. And so it's not a documentary, it's a linear narrative feature film, but he was able to get the funding that way because Canada's national funder only supported content in English and French. And that was 20 years ago, and the fight to get that equity is still ongoing. So now Indigenous languages are supported. There's an Indigenous fund at Telefilm, but the creation of the ISO 8 years ago was in response to the fact that Indigenous storytellers were still not getting access to the funding at the levels of non-Indigenous people who were making Indigenous films about Indigenous people. And so this is when the idea of nothing about us without us really took off, and we started looking at the idea of narrative sovereignty as being grounded in ownership and control. And so all of our funding goes to Indigenous-owned projects. And so in the North, what we've seen is that has stimulated new levels of creation where Indigenous people in the Arctic, and there's a show, North of North, on Netflix that's been super successful. We're really proud to support that show. But for us, what makes it Indigenous by definition is the ownership and control of the project. And then what you see with shows like North of North, and what you see obviously in Zach's work, is where that authenticity is coming from, and audiences respond to that because it's coming from that place of the Indigenous storyteller being actually able to tell the story that they want to.
No, I love that. And I think you're touching on a point where you both, referencing Zacharias, this thing where it's like Indigenous storytellers were existing whether or not the opportunity was there. And now we're sort of on the back end of them figuring out how they can get themselves into scenarios like this, get themselves into funding models. But I want to take a step back just a little bit. And I'm coming to you, Lajla, you haven't had a chance yet. And I want to talk about Arctic storytelling over the last several years. How does its progression or evolution over the last several years inform what you see ahead?
Yeah, but before we go there, I also want to comment a little bit on what you have been touching on from the Sámi perspective. So we also had like our first director, Nils Skaup, who did Pathfinder in 1987. And he was fighting for a decade to get that film funded through the national film funding bodies at that time, because nobody believed that anyone would want to see a film in Sámi language, because that was like the starting point of Pathfinder. It's an ancient Sámi story. And finally, he managed to fund the film, and he shot it in Guodegain, where our film institute is located today. And it was also nominated for an Academy Award, which was a huge thing. So he proved everyone wrong who didn't believe in him. And I was 14 years old when it premiered in Guodegain, in the Cultural House, and I saw that film, and it was life-changing, because it was the first time we saw ourselves, our people, our traditions, language. We heard Sámi language on a big cinema screen for the first time ever. So, yeah, but now I don't remember what your question was.
No, I think you're touching on it exactly right,
Yeah,
where we're talking about the evolution,
Yeah,
and how does that inform the future?
Yeah, and of course, like you are talking about Zacharias Kunuk and then Nils Scope, and we have people here also in the audience, Bird Running Water, who has built, been such a important inspiration, supporter for us from the very beginning, and who has been like walking the path for us in the deep snow and inspiring the generations to come. So without their fights, we wouldn't be here with our own indigenous-owned, led institutions and funding systems like we have today. And this enables us, for example, like the Sámi Film Institute, we established it 15 years ago because we couldn't get our films funded, as Nils Scope earlier. We couldn't either get our films funded through the national institutes because they still didn't believe in Sámi language stories at that time. So we thought, okay, we need our own funding body who can primarily fund Sámi language films by Sámi filmmakers. So nothing about us without us, like we are all saying. And that change has enabled a new generation of Sámi filmmakers who are now stepping into bigger productions, feature films, drama series. Yeah.
I think what I love what you're saying, because it's like this thing of Canada maybe having created some sort of blueprint of sorts. I'm not saying the house was built perfect, but there is some sort of blueprint that then you are pulling from and able to build on top of. Jason, I'm wondering from your vantage point, because you've been doing international programming, but you've also have such a strong foundation in Canada, and now that you're heading the Arctic Indigenous Film Fund, I'm wondering what are some of the things that sort of have happened in Canada when you look at where they're at in the timeline. What are some things that have happened in Canada that maybe don't need to happen in this other space, like the lessons learned or best practices that they can sort of carry over in their own evolution?
Yeah, I mean, look, we learn from each other, and even within Canada, we sort of built on the work of what happened in Australia in the 90s with Screen Australia's Indigenous unit at the time. Which really was so foundational. And sometimes I think, I wish we would have learned more from kind of their best practices in terms of what's happened. I think what's really innovative in terms of what we're doing collectively, Arctic Indigenous Film Fund was founded in 2018 out of the International Sámi Film Institute to really look at something that I think all Indigenous filmmakers have been wanting, but have been blocked by kind of regulations from the nation state, and something that the Indigenous Screen Office is really trying to dismantle. So if we think of, again, that kind of northern view of the globe, Greenlandic Inuit and Inuit in Canada have stronger linguistic, artistic, cultural, historical ties between each other than any of them do to those of us in the South. And that sort of extends all the way across through, even with Sámi in Scandinavia and the Nordics. There's blocks between Sweden, Norway, Finland in terms of sort of supporting a filmmaker from the same sort of ethnic cultural group to work together. So when I think sort of like looking at what we're doing, I think this approach of an inherent, intrinsic kind of cross-border partnership is something that I think, we're taking the lead on in a way that we didn't in the past, because we were really just trying to convince our national funding bodies to pay attention to us and to support more than one project a year. So I think that's such a key part and something that's really innovative. It's like beyond co-productions. It's sort of beyond partnerships. It's actually kind of a dismantling of borders, but in a way that makes perfect sense, I think.
Well, and I think we're just like, as you say, we're like on the cusp of this. So I'm interested to hear from you, Emile. Has that informed any of the sort of creative endeavors that you're, like, is there stories that you couldn't do 10 years ago that are possible now? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that evolution and how some of these efforts are potentially making it possible for you to have just better access.
Well, I think it's probably gotten easier over the past 10 years. I still wouldn't say that it's possible. But we try to do it anyways, and Jason is totally right. It's a different way of seeing collaborations, and I think for me, my first film came out in 2014 and was selected by Jason at Imaginative, and that was the first time that we met. But it was also the first time that I realized that there were indigenous filmmakers around the world working together, seeing each other's works, and that we had some kind of understanding of each other's stories, even though we came from different sides of the globe, basically. So that was completely new to us when we came into that world. And I think as filmmakers and film communities, all of us, we are on the margins, or we are outside of the mainstream, and we have fought in that position since we started our work, and we have fought colonial structures, we've fought structural challenges with funding, with distribution, with even like, where are we from as filmmakers? I mean, what country is put in parentheses after the title of our film? I mean, these like completely fundamental things. We have fought these battles separately, always. But now when we discover each other, we can at least build things together that can hopefully make it easier. So I did a couple of years ago a documentary called Twice Colonized. And the project was on that film to work together Inuit producers in Greenland with Inuit producers in Canada. And it was a perfect situation because the main character of the film was a Greenlandic Inuk woman activist who lived in Canada. So, I mean, you know, the co-production was just like so natural and so relevant. But we quickly found out that, on the one hand, me as a Greenlandic production company not being able to get support from the Danish Film Institute because it's two different film laws made it impossible for me to get the money I needed for my side of the co-production. And in return, my fellow Inuit co-producers in Canada didn't have the track record to access the mainstream national film funding in Canada. And so what we had to do was that I had to open up a company in Denmark to access the Danish Film Institute, and they had to make a provincial co-production with another province and with non-indigenous producers in South Canada to access the film funding there. And only that way we could make this co-pro. And that was just what we had to do at the time, and I don't think that we really thought that much of it, other than, okay, so we have to do this if we want to make this film, and we have to make this film even if it takes 10 years. So I think those kind of cases is what opens doors, and what we talk to with Kerry and with other funders and with TV stations and with the Danish Film Institute to try to build programs that can make these kind of cases easier, because we do want to work together. I mean, it would be ridiculous to not share our common storytelling when we share our language, our culture, even our colonial histories. And we are, you know, we always made fun of that because we work together between Nuuk and Iqaluit. It's a 1-hour flight, only there were no flights. So for me to visit, I had to fly to Denmark, then I had to fly to Toronto, then I had to fly to Ottawa, then I had to fly to Iqaluit. It took 3 days. So I mean, just that fact. And now there's a direct flight. So things are getting easier.
That is like when you were talking about the gymnastics you had to do to get that funded. I still remember watching it pitched at the Forum at Hot Docs. The gymnastics you had to do, and then you're talking about the flight there. I'm like, these two things are the same. These two things are the same. Kerry, this might be a broad question, but you know, we're sort of hearing about these things that are happening that get that, you know, dial to move. But the reality is you're in the room having those conversations, and you're the one sort of lifting the dial and pushing it. Maybe you can bring us into those conversations and some of the things that you bring forward into those spaces. Like, it's always great, obviously, to have filmmakers in there, but you're coming at it from a slightly different vantage point as a funder.
Yeah, so just for context, the ISO is a national funding body that is, our funding comes from the Government of Canada, but we're an independent, not-for-profit organization. But all of our funding through the government has required a huge amount of advocacy for us to be able to spend that money in the way that we actually need to support Indigenous content creation. So and we currently have $24 million Canadian under our administration. So it's significant funding. And you can see the impact in Canada of having that level of funding, which we're continuing to grow that base funding. But one of the examples is when we were negotiating our agreement with the government, we pushed really hard to be able to do things that would allow us to support capacity in the North. So one thing we fund is capital. Most funders, it's very rare for a film agency or a funder like ours to be able to support capital. And so one of the early investments we made was for $1 million. That was the largest funding that we'd given to the company, Red Marrow, who created North of North. And because they were building that studio, it triggered the show to be shot in Iqaluit instead of in the South as the broadcasters were planning to shoot it in the South. That made that show better. That made that show an economic driver for the community. And they've been greenlit for season 2. So season 2 is coming out in the fall, which we're really excited about. But we had to push and push for that, for the ability to do that. Another thing we're pushing for is the ability to fund across borders. In Canada, Indigenous people have constitutional, treaty, and legal rights, and one of our rights is to self-determination. And we see the ability to work with our peers across borders as an expression of our self-determination. As funders, we should be able to support collaborations across borders that don't necessarily go through the national treaty co-production process, which has a ton of barriers built into that process. And so this is the kind of language, I use when I'm talking to government. But it does take a long time. We have a clause in our agreement with the government. We're allowed to support a project with a Canadian producer that it crosses borders and it doesn't necessarily meet the definition of Canadian, but we can fund it. But the problem I realized after we pushed for this clause to be in our agreement is that we don't have enough money to fund a whole feature film. Like, we can't give $5 million for someone to just go make a feature. So unless everybody else who's a funding agency has that clause or that ability to fund across borders in that way, then it is very little impact for us to be able to do that. So those are the kinds of things we're trying to keep pushing to be able to support that cross-border collaboration.
I'd love to hear your perspective on it, Lajla.
Yeah, so I totally understand what Kerry is speaking about, and we also have because Sámi people, we are spread across 4 countries in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and even Russia. And from the very beginning, it has been very important for us to be able to, for the Sámi Film Institute, to support Sámi producers, filmmakers in all the countries where Sámi people live. Even though the main funding comes from the Norwegian Ministry of Culture, Finland has at some point been supporting to some extent. So, and also with the establishment of the Arctic Indigenous Film Fund, which was an initiative from the Sámi Film Institute and in collaboration with Canada Media Fund, Sundance Film Institute at the time, and also partners in Russia and Greenlandic Film Association. So this this perspective of the Arctic, because maybe the world looks at the Arctic as vast, empty space, wilderness. But to us, it is our homeland. And the Arctic, the whole circumpolar Arctic, is the homeland of very, very many indigenous peoples all across. So this was the idea for the Arctic Indigenous Film Fund also, because we saw this, rising interest to our stories, indigenous stories in general, but also looking geopolitically at the Arctic with a rising interest in exploitation, industrialization, mining, windmills, you name it. This is ongoing fights in the Sámi areas. And in this development, and maybe especially today, this is why it's so crucial, the work we are all doing to building the possibilities for our people who live in the Arctic, in our indigenous homelands, to both tell our stories in this development, but also to build different kind of future possibilities for our young people. So maybe they don't need to work in the, industries. Maybe they can choose creative, like film and
Well, and I do want to talk about that sort of Arctic perception that you're talking about, right? Where it's being viewed a very specific way. Now I think we can probably just call a spade and say there's also an American administration that is also looking to the north, so there's another layer there. I almost want to leave this open for Jason or Emile, because I feel like you'll both have a perspective on it. But I am sort of wondering, all of those things coming in play right now, is it applying pressure in a good way or a bad way? Because the stakes are very high now, right? And it's like, are these infrastructures going to be set up in a way that indigenous storytellers are going to be able to own what they need to own at this very crucial time? So I don't know. Jason or Emile, I feel like you could probably chime into that.
Yeah, I think it's it's a little soon to tell. I mean, friends of mine were considering moving from Greenland. Friends of mine were considering moving to their summer houses in the fjord to hide from an invasion. They were talking about how their grandparents weren't strong enough to go with them, that they had to stay behind in the cities if the invasion came. People had those kinds of conversations. Yeah. So what happened last year and this January was not good. But I agree that there's also an opportunity in all that, and I think that the work that we are doing is trying to also to advocate or to teach people that we exist, because this is the politics of America right now is based on an idea that we don't exist. And I remember traveling in the 90s and hearing that. And funnily enough, it was always in America that people would say, Greenland? Wow, I really didn't know that people lived there. And to have that again now on that level is just like super scary. But of course, I also recognize that the attention is an opportunity to get our films out wider and to do new projects that are bigger, and to scale up our ambitions, and also to put pressure on the decision makers that we fight to get to understand our perspective and to respect our perspective. Because I mean, as minorities, we are always met with decision makers who see our world from their point of view, and who have a certain, idea of what a Greenlandic story is and what elements that should be in a story. So hopefully we can change that a little bit. And of course, I have also seen my projects being easier to fund in the past year. And I am also on a daily basis contacted by international production companies that want to do projects in Greenland and are looking for collaborations or co-productions and projects that are opportunities for us as well to build our industry bigger. at the same time with the risk of being, completely spread thin, and if we keep doing other people's projects, we will never have time to do our own. So it's a balancing line.
I do want to hear from you, Jason, on this, but before I do, I just want to have one quick follow-up. Now you're getting this increased interest. Do you feel a difference in terms of those inquiries? Do they feel like extraction, or do they feel like a true partnerships that are coming through to you now?
I think we have both. I mean, I definitely see also people coming there just because now, okay, it's a crazy time right now. We have to do something. We have to do something for our audiences. So, I mean, in January, it was crazy. Tripods in the street everywhere. I mean, and in a small community like Nuuk, you are always, when you walk down the street, you have to say hi to everyone, right? You have to because otherwise the next day, oh, this guy, he didn't say hi. I wonder what's up. And so, but there we really have to, like, if you caught the eye of a journalist, I mean, you were done for. So that was a completely like a wild situation. So there's definitely something that's exploitative, but then there's also, like I said, these projects that the international projects that are greenlit now because of what's happening, and that come to us and where we can actually create meaningful collaborations, and where they listen to us, and where they give us rights, and where we can dictate some of the structures that we build our co-productions around, because we can't raise a lot of money for co-pros. So what we say to international projects is that we can be your co-producers, and we can help you with the production in Greenland. We can read your script, and we can help you create it more truthfully, ethically, and then we will take some rights and we will take some money for that. But we won't raise any money of our own, and they accept that.
That's incredible. Now we're going to come to you, Jason. Sorry, so we backtrack a second now.
No, I mean that all really resonates. I mean, I think the sense of anxiety that we also had in Canada last year was in many ways a new feeling, and that sparked a lot of action, I think, within Canada and sort of looking elsewhere. But I mean, really, we're talking about collectively building an industry alongside others. And when we're looking at the North, it's sort of looking at this cultural artistic industry alongside other kinds of industries that are developing, largely extractive. But within the realm of kind of Canada and Europe, it's about asserting Arctic sovereignty when a lot of these nations are under threat. And I think this is the crux of our kind of maybe somewhat provocative title, Arctic Storytelling in the New World Order. It's already disruptive. So what's happening in Russia, of course, so we can't support Evenki, Chochki, Saka, other indigenous filmmakers in Russia in the way that we did prior to the war in Ukraine, for example. So there's disruptive factors happening there. Similarly with America, that's also a disruptive factor. But this is where, too, I think there's an interesting angle in terms of what we're doing collectively, is we can actually also support the goals and ambitions of the nation states that we're in. Canada has a very sort of active Arctic policy and policies and frameworks in place here that sort of the work that we're doing actually actively meets those goals in asserting national sovereignty in these areas. So I think that's sort of something that kind of, we want to bring to attention to governments, to government agencies in our countries to say, look, we're doing this work that actually kind of meets your goals and objectives in asserting claims to land in the Arctic. And I think that proposition is really exciting because we are very much in the early stages of building this industry. And for example, the work that we do at the Arctic Indigenous Film Fund is very small scale. We can only really do shorts at the moment and sort of some development work. And so it's looking to build something bigger. And we see a pathway, again, through this mechanism of supporting the larger policy goals of nation states.
I love how I'm going to come down to Lajla now, and she has her phone out. I'm so sorry. She's got emails, you guys. She's a busy gal, okay? But I am sort of wondering from your perspective where you think the sort of opportunity or maybe risks are that are in front of you given the geopolitical climate.
I think, like Jason is saying, and Emile also, and Kerry here, that in this situation, there is great opportunity for us in building a future for our, the younger generation, the next generations of indigenous filmmakers, because of this rising interest, and also that that indigenous stories can resonate. Not only to us indigenous peoples, but also to global audiences and to the national states that we majority audiences in our home countries. So yeah, and of course. Thinking of the risks again, I think even though I think maybe Canada is the one way ahead when it comes to supporting indigenous film and institutions, like economically. In the Nordic countries, there is a truth and reconciliation process going on. In Sweden, Finland, and Norway, they have finished this process, but now. This, reconciliation process should get started, and there Canada has, your 94 points to action, where your governments have really shown that they support indigenous culture and institutions economically also. So I think that is, from our perspective, that's the risk we see, that, with all the wars going on in the world, all the economical, crisis, this is where the focus is, for example, in the Nordic countries when it comes to, military, building defense in the north, in the Arctic, and so this is what I see is one of the big challenges, that they don't see maybe the power of culture as a defense also, because you also need people who are living in these areas and who have a life and they have a job and they can, live there. So yeah.
Well, I think you're talking about sort of the texture that these stories can bring when people think about them more broadly, right? I'm going to actually ask you a question, Jason, about kind of that disconnect. Oh my God, Kerry, add away, girl.
I just want to add something to what Lajla said about, Canada is doing okay in this regard, but you referenced the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which has I think it's 94 recommendations or 97 recommendations, and they just celebrated their 10-year anniversary of releasing that report and those recommendations, and 14 have been met. 14. So this is a long road, and part of our advocacy is looking at this new form of colonization that's happening in the Arctic and saying, if you are not supporting indigenous voices at the table in decision making and in storytelling, then it's just the same old colonization. It's just the same old thing all over again. And so Canada does have these strategies, these policy papers that are out there, that their Arctic sovereignty policy does have a lot of Indigenous inclusion in it. And so it's our job to say, where is the money to support those objectives and to make sure that they're actually happening. And so that's the work that we're doing now.
No, I totally appreciate that. Now, before we go, thank you for those additions. Before we come to Jason, because I want to talk a little bit about the disconnect between Arctic storytellers as they see themselves politically and creatively versus how audiences see them. But before I do that, this is your warning, guys. If you want to ask a question, start thinking about it now, because after this, I'm going to open it up. And like I said, a prize is on the line, and it's my friendship. I'm a terrible friend, though. I should probably have said that when I announced the prize at the beginning of the panel. But Jason, you're seeing films before and after this, focus on them. And I'm in all the years that you've sort of been watching films from the various roles you've had, I'm curious if the vision that they have of themselves, both like creatively and politically, matches how audiences are experiencing their work?
No, not usually, I think, is kind of the case from here. I mean, you know, we talked about, you know, Pathfinder, which was 87, which as far as we know was, again, the first Indigenous film to be nominated for an Oscar. There was Ánorâk here in 2000, 2001. Numiok was 2009, you said? Yeah, the first Greenlandic feature film, which was at Sundance. And so these are like key milestones with a lot of time apart from each other. But I think what all of those have in common was something that was, you know, subverted the global expectations of what the North looks like, the types of stories that existed there. Like, I think Numiok in particular was something pretty groundbreaking. Ánorâk, whilst it was sort of set in the past, again, was a very different kind of presentation of an ancient story that just completely rattled, I think, sort of expectations and understandings of the North. And so that's where we really kind of find, I think, you know, in all the work that we do collectively with Indigenous filmmakers, not just in the Arctic, but giving them the means to tell the stories. I mean, that's where that authenticity, that beauty, all that voice comes from. You know, we always say that Indigenous cinema has been going for decades, and we've always existed as a kind of counter cinema to like largely what's happening within our own countries, but broadly too. And so we've just been doing what we've always been doing here in terms of what we're doing, supporting each other as best we can with kind of, you know, breakout spots along the way. And it's really just about, again, saying, look, this is still ongoing. We need help. We need partnerships. We need to kind of, you know, bring more stories out.
Of course, Lajla, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Jason is saying, that also, you know, thinking of the Indigenous film history and, you know, the films you are mentioning, but also looking at contemporary Indigenous like productions now, like North of North, which is like humoristic, it's cool, it's just super, yeah, amazing. And then we have, like in Sámi, we had the wedding party, which it was also screening in Toronto, which is like super dark, but funny, humoristic. It's this chaotic Sámi wedding party. 4 siblings are going to, you know, organize the wedding in 1 month, and it's just, yeah, it just doesn't, yeah, it's so, you know, and then also the variety of genres, so futuristic, sci-fi, horror films. So there is so much talent also in our stories, and I think that's also something that we at least experience, that some of our feature films they do resonate with audiences globally. They are traveling, like Arru, which is the first ever Joik musical by LSO Fesara. It's going to premiere at Berlinale. It's going to Sydney, you know, Tribeca, and so yeah.
That's interesting, because I think you guys are both talking about this evolution of when we started to own these things and when we started, and the narrative sovereignty I think that Kerry's talking about. So Kerry, I'd be interested because I feel like you're in these spaces where they're seeing the work, they're seeing how it benefits by being owned and controlled by Indigenous people, and that is what you're advocating for. But when you're in these spaces and you are doing that lobbying work, do you feel like they understand the nuance of that and how these stories are different? Or do you feel like you are kind of preaching the same stuff over and over again?
Yeah, I think people are getting it because the content is there now. So they can see it, it's accessible. I find in my work a lot of the time I have a lot of people agreeing with everything I'm saying, but the money doesn't come. So I'm just like, where is the money? And so you just push in, everyone's, you know, saying, yes, 100%, we support you, everything you say is amazing. I'm like, well, where's the fucking money? So it takes so long, right? And you have to just keep pushing and pushing. And so you have to always be ready. You know, I always associate my job as an advocate and as a fundraiser. I grew up in the bush and I grew up fishing. It's like fishing. You're waiting, you're doing all the things, you're putting everything in place so that when the fish bites, you are ready. And so when the Arctic sovereignty piece started coming into play in a big way in the news, I was ready and going straight to the government saying, you're investing in this Arctic defense strategy and culture should be there side by side. And so we're putting proposals in and we're taking that moment as the opportunity because we've already laid the groundwork. We're already ready for it. And so I'm always looking for those moments where I can turn those geopolitics or what's happening in the larger culture to our advantage. But it is you have to try a lot of different doors before you get the right ones open.
Do you want to add to that, Emile? I feel like
it's just so true that we need institutions and we need people like Kerry who are, ready with the fish hook to pull. And I was thinking it's funny because you mentioned, Jason, and you mentioned Australia as people who came before you and paved the way, and you mentioned Canada, and I think that I would then mention the Sámis and mention you, and Lajla, and ISFI, and the International Sámi Film Institute, that you have been paving the way for us in Greenland with your presence in the last 15 years, and really for us to see what it means to have an institution that takes the work seriously and takes capacity building seriously, takes independent, autonomous funding seriously, and what that means to a film community. And we're only just getting there. We have a film institute now that launched this year, finally, after 20 years of making films and advocating for this. So the future for us is also to have that institution that will allow us to make productions like North of North and The Sámi Wedding, and who will push the Danish system to invest more in our stories, push Danish broadcasters to invest in Greenlandic-led TV series, to tell our contemporary stories in a way that North of North and The Sámi Wedding does, because I think that's a proven formula. We can all see how successful and effective it's been because it's contemporary and it's fun and it's accessible, and at the same time it comes from within. It comes authentically from our community, and so that's what I hope for our future as well.
Yeah, super rooted and modern, right? Of what Arctic Indigenous looks like in today's lens.
Yeah, and all of these productions, they haven't been made completely 100% by Indigenous crew. We're not there yet, and that's fair enough. But we need to have the writers, we need to have the directors, we need to have the showrunners who can tell the stories, and then we need to have the ownership, and then we can cooperate with anyone into producing them in a way that meets the market today.
You guys aren't getting a question in, so we'll raffle off my friendship. Anna Lajla.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, so if you look at the, circumpolar Arctic, what is interesting now compared to when we started is that then 15 years ago, when we started the Sámi Film Institute, there were not really any other Indigenous-led institutions. And then ESO came along, and then we established Arctic Indigenous Film Fund, and now we have the Greenlandic Film Institute. So we are covered across the circumpolar Arctic with Indigenous-owned, Indigenous-led institutions. The only thing we lack is the funding, the big money, so we can make whatever, and we can support all our talents with hundreds of millions of dollars, and so they can make billions. So that's what we need. Yeah.
And Jason, what do you want to add?
I was just going to add, to Emile's conversation, what's interesting is where kind of the all-Indigenous cast and crew has been happening is like Sakha Republic in Yakutia in eastern Russia. And there, because they just couldn't ever access Russian state funding, they really developed this incredible industry of your own. Now with current geopolitical situations, of course, they're kind of isolated again from the rest of the global community, which is unfortunate.
I can trust you to bring a deep cut like that. Incredible, Jason. Okay, maybe we do have time for one question. Anybody? Otherwise, I'm going to move to... Oh, this is my new best friend. Oh, you guys can fight for me later. It's fine.
Thank you. I'm Ágoston, producer from Hungary, and for me it's a really interesting conversation because I feel like it's a little bit frightening that you are so pragmatic about this situation, what's happening there, because you are there, and I feel like it's even more big problem in the Arctic in terms of climate change and geopolitics and things like that. So how you feel about it? Because as I see, and the projection tells that the ice is melting, and so we burn fossil fuel, and the ice is melting, and we have access even more fossil fuel to burn. So it's kind of a contradiction, and in the end of the day, so we have this projection maybe on 30s, the ice will disappear in the summers, so it's totally affects the indigenous people, but also diversity. So it's a very, very complex, intertwined issues. And do you see, because you also told about the money, do you see it can be, because it's more serious and serious, be more popular in that sense?
Who wants to take this one? I feel like it might be Emile or...
Well, I can say briefly that, I mean, yeah, of course, it's super scary. I mean, no doubt about it. I have had to cut down on my news consumption as well because I just couldn't take it for my mental health. I should say that I'm based in Copenhagen, so I don't live full-time in Greenland, but my whole family does. And what I know, and also from my colleagues, is, we live in it. So this is our reality, and we can't just like think of climate change all the time. So we try to show our world and how we live it and how we cope with life in our community, how it is for better and worse. That's maybe also to a little bit of an extent a survival mechanism, but yeah, it's what we have to do.
Yeah, I can add to that, for example, the Arctic Indigenous Film Fund has, maybe you can also talk more about that, Jason, but the Witness program, which is addressing, climate change issues from indigenous perspectives. So it's this micro shorts of 5 minutes put together. And so, yeah, climate anxiety is something also we who live in the Arctic see and experience more and more, like reindeer. For example, in Sámi, we have a lot of reindeer herders, and weather is changing, winters are changing. The reindeer herders, since 3-4 years ago, they have been forced to start feeding big reindeer herds. So it's a big impact for us.
Okay, we have time for one more question. And then the last question is going to be your Arctic recommendation. So think of that while she's asking.
Hello. Thank you all for sharing all your experience. And I feel a lot like everything resonates, even though I'm, doing something completely different. I'm Michelle Ziegler from New Images. We are dedicated to immersive art. Immersive art, there's now here an immersive competition, but immersive art is somewhere between cinema, gaming, contemporary art, and museum experiences. And we work a lot with young people, but our main drive as nonprofit is also to learn from all these sectors and not reproduce the same mistakes. So one of them is to bring forward indigenous voices and stories now that it's still in the making, even though it's been 10 years, for example, that there was an immersive competition in Venice. Is there room for you to also try and go into that movement so that we don't miss that moment? Because, for example, it's also in new technologies and AI, we want to, bring the stories now.
I know you weren't asking me specifically, but I will say that we do have an interactive and immersive fund with the Indigenous Screen Office, our work of which has been programmed hopefully soon to be Venice, knock on wood. But Berlinale, we did an incredible video game this year, Lisa Jackson's Star Stories. So in Canada, I would say we're deep into it, but I'd be interested to hear.
Yeah, in Sámi also we've had the Aran 360, which was at the Venice Biennale in 2022, 360 films, and also we are, and you are also.
yeah, I'm making a fantastic VR film with Greenlandic Inuk artist Lajla Williamson. She's based in Canada as well. So I think it's a great opportunity, and from when I tried VR glasses the first time, I thought this is for us. But I don't really see yet that there's a penetration of filmmakers and equipment in the communities. So I know of very few people in Greenland who have access to creating immersive projects. But I just feel like the opportunity to have on the one hand to start over in a new medium side by side with the rest of the world is a positive. Yeah. And then also because we're so few people and we're so separated, to be able to be a little bit more together in the virtual space and seeing these communities from an inside perspective, like literally in the immersive project. So yeah, I think there's an opportunity there.
Thank you so much for that question. Or do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, no, I hope to see you at New Images Festival next year, because we have our own market, which is the biggest immersive market. So.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I will be there. Okay, so you have one recommendation to share for an Arctic storyteller, and then we got to shut her down. Our guy here is like, it's over, guys.
Yeah, so mine is what I just said. The VR, the VR film. It's not out yet, but it will be fantastic. And then if I could also highlight Lajla as an artist, because she works across all kinds of mediums and platforms. She just had a huge solo exhibition at London Gallery, and she's doing one now, I think in a couple of weeks, in Ontario National Gallery. She's fantastic. Check her out.
Yeah, she's the best.
Arru, which is the Yoik musical, which is now traveling all around the world. Elsa Sara, she's a Sámi director, she's a choreographer, and she also has a play called The Answer is Land. She's the one artist in Norway who has been traveling the most with this play internationally last year. So she's incredible, and if you get the chance to see Arru, I recommend it. It's beautiful, beautiful film.
The romantic feature film, The Tundra Within Me, by Sámi director Sara Margreta Oskar.
That's a good one.
If you haven't watched North of North, it's on Netflix Global. You can watch season 1, and you can binge that one and wait till the fall for season 2 to come out.
I want to thank you all for joining. I'm going to second Kerry's, but I want to thank you all for joining us. I also just want to say that these conversations about self-determination are more important now than they've ever been, and really just want to thank our panelists and keep those folks in mind who are under occupation, violence, ongoing struggle. Keep them in our heart, especially when we have conversations like this, and don't stop believing in the power of change through storytelling. And so thank you guys all. This is so much fun.